Hello and welcome to Daily Debrief brought to you by People's Dispatch. I'm Pragya. Brazil's Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva stepped into his third presidential term on January 1, a historical development that thousands cheered on. But Lula also inherits economic challenges and social fault lines from his right-wing predecessor. Today, we look at the way forward in Brazil. We then take a look at Israel's policies, where the government is propped up by hard right supporters, especially figures like National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who recently entered the Al-Aqsa mosque compound. To what end is the Israeli state acting? And finally, South Korea signals a wish to step up its partnership with the United States on nuclear weapons the latter owns. The details are vague and conflicting, but alleged threats from North Korea are an increasingly bigger political issue in the South. More on this and our other stories in today's episode of Daily Debrief. Brazil's Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva was sworn in on the first day of 2023 amid jubilant crowds, a ceremony right-wing outgoing President Jair Bolsonaro did not attend. Stakes are high for Brazil's new government, which must confront rollbacks in social schemes by previous governments and help the millions forced to live in poverty. What are the issues and concerns? And most of all, what is the significance of Lula's return to Brazil? We talked to Prashant from People's Dispatch. So Prashant, good to have you here. Prashant, sort of a fairy tale moment in Brazil. Can you talk about what it was like?
Right, so Pragya, yeah, like you said, that's one way of describing it because it's important to remember that Lula da Silva took over as president, but just a few years ago in 2019, maybe in 2018, 2019, he was in jail. And, he had been persecuted in a case of what is clearly now recognized as lawfare. Court after court was deciding against him. It was blatantly clear to observers across the world that this was a political prosecution. But that did not stop the judge involved, the prosecution, and even the government from persecuting him. It was also unclear if he would ever come back to public life again. But here we have it, it's 2022, and he's come back winning a very historic election, a very important election for the people of Brazil. And so in that sense, yes, it's truly a historic moment, something I think in 18 or 19, not many people may not have expected. So a lot of the credit goes to the fact that across the country, there was a very strong base of people, activists, supporters, people who kind of held the faith, so to speak.
Right.
Even when there was a lot of negative news and a barrage of misinformation being thrown out around him, people who sort of continued to support the project that Lula was closely involved with, that he had always sort of championed, and that project was very central to their vision of how Brazil should be. So a lot of credit has to go to those people also, who his supporters, those associated with him, the progressive movements, the people's movements, the trade unions, who did not lose faith at that point of time. But also important, I think, in the sense that the symbolism of the swearing in was also very significant, in the sense that we know that the incumbent President Jair Bolsonaro did not stay for the swearing in ceremony. He left to the US state of Florida. So the handing over the presidential the sash, which is a tradition, was actually done by a worker who works in the garbage sector, or picks up trash. So that itself a highly symbolic moment. It kind of indicates what the priorities Lula has set in his coming term. And I think there was an overarching sentiment of, among his supporters, among the crowds, there was a sentiment of, of the importance of, say, love and unity and working together against the politics of hate. And this marks a very distinct tonal difference from what Jair Bolsonaro, during his time in the campaign and before that as president and during his first campaign, right, throughout kept talking about a polarized, about a polarized country, of a country, faced by enemies, and about having to fight these enemies and defend Brazil from these external evil enemies. So that sense of conflict and what Lula has brought now are completely different. There's very exact opposites. So that also, I think, setting the tone for what Lula might do in the coming years as well. So both, I think, at the larger significance of Lula coming back and the immediate significance of the swearing in ceremony, both of them are equally important that way.
Right, Prashant. Prashant, also Jair Bolsonaro not showing up also sort of signals the kind of challenges that lie ahead. Also, a lot of commentators are saying the economy is not what it was in Lula's previous terms. So a little bit on the roadmap.
Yeah, so I think if you look at some of the initial announcements made by Lula, they kind of indicate where he's going. For instance, he has promised a sum of 600 riyals to people who are part of the Bolsa Familia program. That is one of his landmark programs, which he had launched earlier. It was cut short and rebranded by
Right.
Bolsonaro. So he's sort of indicating that that will be a key point. He's increased support on that count. If you look, for instance, at the fact that he has, basically he has rolled back some of the easing of gun ownership procedures which Bolsonaro brought about. For instance, he has prohibited the use of weapons by people younger than 18. The number of guns that you can own has been reduced from 6 to 3. And the gun lobby was a key supporting factor behind Bolsonaro. So he's really kind of indicated that this kind of very liberal gun policies will not be implemented. He has already also initiated measures to sort of improve the protection of the Amazon forests, both in terms of getting international donations, also in terms of reducing the kind of illegal felling of trees and mining and other activities that is taking place there. So definitely the environment is going to be a very important aspect. He's also appointed his former Environment Minister Marina Silva, who was also running as a candidate. So that is definitely going to be a key aspect. There are going to be say the exclusion of certain students from key points from education sector, from other sectors. That has also been reversed. So again, in an inclusive option when it comes in an inclusive approach when it comes to issues of healthcare education, definitely going to be a huge factor. Also a very important factor to note is the fact that they're going to take a look at the privatization announcements of key public sector undertakings, which again
Right.
is a very important step. So I think these 5 or 6 policies itself signal where Lula is going. In his speech, he made a very emotional point about the millions who are suffering from hunger, the approximately 100 million people who live in poverty, and how his first priority will be to actually bring them out of hunger, bring them out of poverty. So that definitely is going to be a very significant part of his outreach, so that people who are, and I think he said that when he first took office, he swore that people would get meals thrice a day, and his point was like, 20 years later, I'm back here and I'm saying the same thing, which kind of shows how bad things have grown. And he's also warned that the transitional cabinet has discovered how the amount of funding that is going to key sectors is really, there's not much money to go for that. So that's something they'll have to rework on. So I think a lot of challenges ahead for Lula. What he does bring to the table is his immense experience, it's a kind of political philosophy and approach which is meant on addressing the issues of the common people. He also right now enjoys a fair degree of support from various sections. He will continue to face challenges in parliament though, so that's definitely a big issue. And we also have to see how internationally he's going to sort of work towards creating this coalition of countries of the global south. Maybe that remains a question also.
Right, Prashant. Thanks a lot for joining us. Israel's internal security minister and Jewish Power Party leader Ben-Gvir is known for his extremist views, and his actions are all the more significant considering he is a key member of the Benjamin Netanyahu government. Ben-Gvir recently stormed the Al-Aqsa compound, reflecting the desire of right-wing sections to occupy all of East Jerusalem and the West Bank, contrary to prior legal arrangements and against the rights of the occupied Palestinians. We go over to Abdul from People's Dispatch for what the storming and the site of the mosque signify. Abdul, good to have you on the show. Abdul, so the news from Israel, it's interesting. What is the right-wing Israeli government trying to prove when its ministers go into the compound of the Al-Aqsa mosque? What is the point they're trying to make here?
Well, I think this is a part of their larger agenda. The new extremist, the most extreme right-wing government Israel has ever seen, has just taken charge a few days back. And Ben-Gvir is basically the representative of that, the ideological orientation of that particular government. And hence, what he did today is basically a hint that about the upcoming policies about the Palestinian issue adopted by his government. So Ben-Gvir has been, as we all know, has been a vocal supporter of annexation of all the occupied territories, and he's has been for a very long time the leader of the movement, which basically does not recognize the Islamic character of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and wants to convert it into a Temple Mount, a Jewish religious place. And because that is his constituency, that is his, from where he has acquired the political mileage, has acquired the political strength in Israeli politics. Of course, he wants to kind of consolidate it further, kind of gives a hint, gives a symbol, a signal that he is not only about rhetoric, he is also about action. So today's visit or storming of the Al-Aqsa Mosque is basically part of its larger political agenda, which Ben-Gvir is following. And since the government of Netanyahu is heavily dependent on Ben-Gvir and his MPs, of course, that is also the agenda of the Benjamin Netanyahu's government. Despite the fact that Netanyahu has, there are reports in Israeli media that in the coalition agreement which ultimately led to the formation of this government, there is a clause which says that the status quo of religious places will not be harmed. Despite that formal clause being there, this visit was allowed, and he was, of course, he is the police minister, he is the national security minister. All the security was provided, and as I said before, this is not for the first time he is visiting or storming the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This is, but first time as an official head, as official visiting there. So to basically if you want to name it, I think this is an assertion which Ben-Gvir has made, a deliberate political step in an attempt to give a message to his constituency and also to the Palestinians that the status of the occupied territories is going to massively being affected during this new government's rule.
Right, Abdul, and that's also clear from some of the statements he's made. Now, could you just explain what the significance of the Al-Aqsa Mosque is, what the entry into the compound actually signifies?
See, this is a historical question, of course, that particular space in the eastern Jerusalem, the old city, old Jerusalem, has been a place of contestation for from ancient times. All three major Abrahamic religions have presence there, but at the moment, it is basically a compound which hosts the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is also known as Haram al-Sharif. So it is considered to be the third holiest site in Islam. But apart from that, it is also, the Jews claim that that this is the place where the original temple was built by Solomon in the ancient time. And therefore, for the extremist, the existence of Al-Aqsa becomes an issue. And therefore, there has been a long attempt ever since the creation of Israel to basically convert that particular Al-Aqsa compound into a Jewish religious place. According to the extremist right-wing Jewish groups in Israel, this is the holiest site in Judaism. Apart from that, when in 1967 there was, of course, the West Bank and the East Jerusalem was occupied by Israeli forces. But at the time of that particular event, there was some kind of understanding, an agreement between the Jordanians, who were having the control over the territory before Israelis took over, to maintain a status quo there. So as per the arrangement made in 1967 between the Israeli government and Jordanian authorities, Israel has the responsibility to maintain a status quo inside the Al-Aqsa compound. It means that only Muslims have the right to pray inside, and other people can visit as tourists, can go around places, but they do not have the right to worship inside it. But as I said before, Ben-Gvir has been leading a movement, and been part of the movement, an extremist Israeli movement, which basically wants to reconvert the entire place and make it a Jewish religious place. So they are attempting, Ben-Gvir and his followers are trying to, they are attempting to convert Al-Aqsa as one of the rallying point for the right-wing forces in Israel, which is basically the larger agenda with which Ben-Gvir's storming was organized with the proper state support.
All right, Abdul, thanks a lot for joining us with that update. South Korea and North Korea have been at loggerheads for many years, but tensions are especially high since Yoon Suk-yeol became president of South Korea last year. Yeol said in a recent interview that nuclear partnership with the United States should be stepped up in a variety of ways. The United States, however, has denied much of what Yeol claimed. Are peace talks between the bitter enemies looking increasingly improbable? We talked to Anish from People's Dispatch. So, Anish, Yoon Suk-yeol's statement in that interview has really raised a lot of eyebrows. Can you talk us through what he said and what the reactions have been from the United States and from the North Korea?
Yeah, so the interview, like this is not a new thing with Yoon Suk Yeol now, as he has given like some similarly controversial interviews in his 6-month presidency already, and that have already raised alarms in the region. And so this is nothing new in that sense. But what we're seeing is a very clear attempt to push the boundaries of the very tenuous. Uh, we need to remember that the Korean War, is not over. So, and it is pretty much the whole peace in the region is pretty much a very tenuous stalemate. And that is the reason. And there is a reason why that stalemate remains. Is the fact that there is a red line that the North does not want the South Korea to cross, which is that of stationing nuclear weapons in its territory. And that has always been the red line for the government in North Korea. And this sort of is pushing the boundaries in many ways. Talking about nuclear drills is kind of like a very provocative statement being made by the South Korean president in this case. And we can also already see the nervousness on the part of the United States, considering the fact that President Biden himself said that there is no such plans for a nuclear drills right now, which shows that the United States is well aware of the dangers that it can pose of if they go ahead with such a provocation, the dangers it can pose for peace in the region, especially, even though they are quite, hostile to the North Korean government right now. It is still more pragmatic in that sense. It is not in pushing the boundaries of the whole red line with nuclear weaponry in the south, and that is where where President Yoon is differing from the U.S. It is a very provocative statement, obviously coming at a time when his administration's popularity is falling very rapidly. His administration is mired in criticism of not managing the economy very well, not managing trade union issues at home, not being able to manage working class South Koreans' problems. And that is definitely is taking, and instead the government is taking towards a sort of jingoistic war drumming at this point, where they can actually expect at least some level of nationalistic support in their favor against the North Korea. Obviously, the statements are coming at a time when obviously the North Korean government is talking about expanding the nuclear weaponry, which is also alarming at the same time. But when you're trying to put meet provocation with more provocation, that is obviously going to just spiral things to a point where we may not see a point of return from them.
Right, Anish. Anish, now both sides being provocative in their own way. Why is that? Is there a way to get back to the status quo where they were at least talking about peace?
Well, in this case, we have to remember that that President Yoon came to the presidency with a campaign to be more aggressive towards the North. His entire campaign, his entire politics revolved around that, especially in terms of foreign relation. It was pretty much the only thing he could offer to the South Korean people, or voters at the time, and that is pretty much what he has been delivering. He has been a long-term critique. Not only him, but the party that supports him have been a long-term critique of the peace process. So under the current administration, we do not see that sort of, like, the hope is slowly fading away. The hope for any kind of peace talks, the hope for any kind of negotiations, even to not drum up more military provocations on both sides of the border. And that attempt does not seem forthcoming from both sides at this point, especially considering the fact that the South Korean government right now is very strongly anti-communist, is encouraging all sorts of provocations, and not just in military through military drills and all sorts of these things, but also allowing for anti-North Korean propaganda to continue to the even where you have these conservatives and anti-North Korean defectors sending pamphlets, like thousands and thousands of pamphlets across the border illegally against existing peace treaties and truce. And that is only a violation of, and further provocation in many ways, the sort of political provocation that they're trying to push through. And that has been encouraged under this government.
Thanks a lot for joining us with that update. And that's all we have for you today. Thank you for watching Daily Debrief. Do come back to us tomorrow for more such stories. Visit our website peoplesdispatch.org, and you can look up our regular updates on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.